I know I did. I know now that I did.
Because I remember you hitting share.
Yeah, me too. Because I remember thinking, oh, they picked up me saying something about my granddaughter texting me.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go back down here. It still says we're broadcasting. All right, we're going to try this. Welcome to Health Service Management 308. For those of you in this 308 class, if you were in the 404 ambulatory, something went amiss in that broadcast, and it did not capture it. So please note that sometime between now and time we have class on Wednesday, I will try to get a little snippet of broadcast up, kind of bring us up to par with that. So we are going to go ahead and get started today in healthcare, finance, and economics, and we're going to be in chapter 17. Today will be a short lecture, and I did somewhat plan it that way. We are just going to cover chapters 17 and 18 this week. And then I am going to be looking forward. They're probably the last chapter of this book. We probably will not do chapter 20 because I have another that deals with the ICD-10s, I do believe, the complete implementation of it. But ICD-10s have already been implemented. So, and I do have some of that information, and I'm going to be incorporating some of that in. I know that you guys are not going to be doing billing and coding, but please note, even though we don't teach the billing and coding here, and it's not a part of the health service management program, should you decide that you would like to have experience in billing and coding to help land you a job quicker, or an entry level, getting your foot in the door somewhere, the vocational center does teach the entry level billing and coding, and it's $600 for ever how many weeks it is that they do it. And that makes you very marketable for that type of a position, because you never know, you might go in that billing and coding position and end up being the manager of that department. That's a way to get in. Just want to share that tidbit of information with you. Because your ICD-10s, that has everything to do with how things are billed and bundled for maximum reimbursement for your physician. Now, physicians are really bad to want to code their own stuff, but that still doesn't mean that you don't go behind them and check it and make sure that they bill and coded it correctly. Because my husband went to the doctor and we got this bill, and I was like, where did this come from? Because he came home and he told me that it was his physical, so his physical is supposed to be covered. No copay, no nothing. And I got a bill for $120. So I went in to inquire about it, and it had been coded wrong. So that's why it's important. If it's coded wrong, they don't get paid. And in this situation, if I had not have questioned it and followed up, I would have just paid the money and never known any wiser. But sometimes people won't pay it. They say my insurance is supposed to pay that, and then the physician could be out that money, or if they had coded it different, the physician may have gotten an additional percentage of that reimbursement based upon their contract. Okay, but today we're going to be talking about capital expenditures. This involves capital expenditure budgets, involves acquiring assets, and they are long-lasting assets, such as equipment, buildings, and land. Your capital expenditure budgets are usually used to plan, monitor, and control those long-term financial investments and issues. Now, here I want to remind you, we're talking about the capital expenditure budgets, but as a little reminder and review, your operations budget generally deals with actual short-term revenues and expenses that are necessary to operate the facility or organization that you're working for. But nevertheless, when you are working on your capital expenditure budgets, decisions have to be made on how to use these type of funds before a capital expenditure budget can be completed. One also needs to be very mindful that the budget for the capital expenditure is usually part of an overall comprehensive financial budget, and this responsibility generally lies within upper management, such as the CFO. Your capital expenditure budgets are also sometimes known as capital spending plans. And your capital expenditure budgets are often created in two different parts. The first one is spending for assets that have already been acquired and are in place. This type of spending protects what you have already have, such as when an existing building needs to be renovated or has to have repairs or so forth and so on. This cost is recorded on the balance sheet as a capital cost, and it is recognized as an asset. Why is that? This type of an expenditure is listed and recorded on the balance sheet as a capital cost, and is recognized as an asset. Why?
What was it? What time is it?
Do what? When you're spending for assets that have already been acquired and that are already in place. This type of spending is what is the spending that's put into place to protect the assets that you already have, your already existing assets.
And they're considered to be new?
No. But whenever you have to do a renovation of a building, or if you had repairs that needed to be done to the building, then that money would be recorded on the balance sheet as a capital cost and recognized as an asset. Why? Because it's already an existing asset. It's a capital cost on your existing asset. That's why it's looked at as an asset. That makes sense to you?
I thought you, no, I was misunderstood the question. I was thinking like, because you've done the renovations, I was thinking of that as a type of investment.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was.
Well, but it is an investment, but it's an investment on existing assets.
Right.
That's why it's looked at as a capital cost and an asset.
Right.
Because when you're doing that budget, the first thing you have to do is you have to look at what you already have. What you already have in place. And you have to answer questions before you begin working on this capital expenditure budget. The first thing you want to do with your existing assets, okay, we own 3 buildings on Park, Center, and Capitol Street. On those 3 buildings that are already existing assets, are there repairs that need to be done? Do we need to renovate rooms? Do we need to do any kind of equipment upgrades? You have to ask yourself and know the answers to those questions when you're working on that capital budget. So that has to be planned for. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because your existing assets that we were just referencing forces planning questions that organizations about the organization's buildings, their equipment, and so forth and so on. You have to ask yourself that. I mean, let me ask you this: with your cars, at the beginning of every year, do you ever think about that I'm going to need 4 oil changes throughout the year, and I need to put that money and start putting that money aside? Am I going to need new tires this year? Have you started putting money aside for those new tires?
I should.
You know, how many times am I going to go through the car wash to wash my car?
I do it like twice a month.
Okay, that's at least $20.
Now if I need the $2 rent. I gotta say.
You must do better than me because mine's $10 every time.
That's the deluxe wash. That's like the highest one that you can get.
No, there's a $12 one.
Really? The one that
It's some of them.
One in
Some of
Princeton, they got like a $2 one, a $5 one, I think an $8 one, and a $10 one. And a lot of times I do the $2 one unless like the weather's nice. But in the winter time, that salt and stuff, it sticks on my paint. So I just try to keep it rinsed instead of washing the whole thing. Sorry, that's gonna get dirty. So
washing it until it stops snowing. If it's gonna snow, and I might drive like a white color.
your car's white. My car is cream. I'm just like white.
Well, the bad thing is, girls, not washing that salt off your paint is going to eat into your paint job.
I rinse it. I just don't wash it.
Yeah, but the residue is still going to be there and oxidize on your paint. But anyway.
I definitely can't afford a paint job if I'm only paying for a $2 wash.
Yeah. But see, my point is, when you're looking and planning for the year, for your budget, those are maintenance items. That's a part of your capital budget that you have to ask yourself to have in place to take care of your already existing asset, to take care of your car. You see?
I know. I'll be lucky if I can save if I can put I don't know, maybe $100 in my savings account. So that's not really.
Hey, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So, that's one example of that. The second part is spending for new capital assets. This expands capital funds whenever you are going to acquire new assets, such as equipment, new buildings, maybe new land. Maybe you're having to buy a new car. And maybe that car payment is going to be more than your existing car payment. Mine went up about $200 when I had to buy a car over what I was paying the last time. So it goes ouch.
What kind of car do you have?
I have I bought one of my dream cars this time though.
Uh-oh.
I have a Cadillac SUV. It's not new. It's not new. It was used.
No?
But it was okay. is new to me and it had lower mileage on it and it still had a warranty. So, hey,
That's awesome. It loses all its value.
as soon as you drive off that lot, that's right. Yeah, because that was one of the things I asked when I said, okay, if I decide I want to trade it back in a short period of time, or if I decide I don't like it, or I want to keep it a year, how bad is it going to depreciate? Am I going to be able to get my money back out of it? And it's like, well, it's already depreciated all it's going to depreciate, so you're in good shape. You'll get your money back. You'll break even. That was my point. That was what I wanted to know. But like when I got ready to have to buy a new asset, I had to sit down and look at my budget. I had to go back and look at my operational budget, what I needed each month to, yeah. Plus, I have to have kind of a sliding scale for groceries, medicine, pet costs, things like that. So I had to go back and look at my operation budget, see how much I had left out of my operating budget to put into my capital asset, my capital expenditure budget for my new purchase of an asset. Then I had to look and see, okay, I have to ask myself that first question. What type of spending needs to be done on existing equipment? Well, for me, on existing equipment, for my car didn't matter because I was still going to have to put the same amount of money back for repairs, oil changes, tires, for that as I would if I'd had a car payment to start with. I still had to do it whether my car was paid for or not. So, you can see how I had to look at both of those questions in relation to my operational budget to come up with a capital expenditure budget. Does that make sense? And the only thing that would be different from my personal example that I just gave you in real life and in the business realm, you would just take out the car and put in an x-ray machine. The only thing is you're going to get to look at the revenue brought in from the x-rays. It's going to help pay for it because it's going to help pay for itself. But you've got to know that you've got enough revenue coming in over and beyond to help make that payment.
Still be safe.
Yeah. But most of the time, no matter what, there is so much money pulled out of an organization, either on a monthly basis or at the end of the year, that's put back into a capital budgeting account for the time when that equipment needs to be purchased, so that they already have money to put toward it. Then sometimes it doesn't always work that way because sometimes there may be a piece of equipment breakdown that they didn't anticipate. It still had a useful life of 2 or 3 years. And they really hadn't been stocking a lot of money back designated for that they may have to pull from somewhere else. The concept of robbing Peter to pay Paul, in a lot of respects, still goes on in corporate business world every day to keep things afloat and running the way it needs to. But ultimately, we get into those positions when we are not watching things with a watchful eye. And it's not just being narrow-minded looking at one area. We have to be constantly viewing the entire operation from beginning to end, and what's going on. Now, not many of us do that because organizations are big, and that's why it's broke down. And each manager of each department has specific job duties, specific things that they have to stay in compliance with. They have a budget. They have that operational budget. Most of the time, they don't deal with that capital budget. That capital budget is always the responsibility of whom? Not the CFO. Yes, yes. Because what happens is all of your department managers are going to report all of their monthly stuff to the people who work in the CFO's office. And those people who work in the CFO's office is going to collect all of the pertinent data that he needs to do the budgets. If there's anything going on, they bring it to his attention. Because that's the place where everything, all the data gets put into that one area, that one department. And then within that department, certain people in the department have different duties, just like your department managers do. They collect data from the reports that come in, and they all collect it into one report, and from that report, capital budgets and so forth are created. Does that make sense? So whenever you are working on this particular part of your budget, when you are looking to spend for new assets, you're going to be focusing on what we call planning, the planning phase, and you're going to ask questions about the new asset. And you will find those questions on page 198. Do we need an expansion of capacity in a particular department or a program? You know, do we need to create a new facility, a new department, or a new program? Do we need some new equipment? Will the new equipment involve new technology? Or is the new equipment that we need to purchase, does it comply with federal and state guidelines? All of those things have to be taken into account when you are making those decisions. Let's say that we were buying a new MRI machine and we were moving it out of one building into another. Well, the building that we want to move it to for easy access and better parking does not meet federal and state guidelines. So what happens? What am I going to have to do if I want to put that piece of equipment there? Expand like how?
I'm not sure. You said for parking?
No, I want to move that MRI machine over to a different building because it's easy access to the patients and better parking. But where I want to move it to in that building, the area is not compliant with state and federal regulations.
I guess you can't really just say expand. Maybe if you have the space to expand, you could expand. Maybe you just may have to move some things around.
Well, the space is already there. The space is big enough, but it's not in compliance with federal and state guidelines.
Maybe move some things around to make it to where it will be in compliance with state.
Well, I don't think it won't be too much moving stuff around, but first thing you would do is find out what those state and federal regulations are. Of course, in reality, you're probably going to go ahead and start looking at that right away, because when you have imaging equipment, it is very specific and detailed in regard to state compliance and federal regulations. In the instance of the MRI where it's up against the building, the wall is attached to the building, there has to be lead walls. There's got to be a lead wall that has to be so many inches thick. Why would you think that is? Well, MRI doesn't have radiation.
I don't know exactly why, but I would assume it's some kind of safety precaution.
It's because
some kind of safety hazard if you don't have it.
It's because of the magnetic field being so strong. It's just like if you go into an MRI area If you have a patient that has a pacemaker, it can cause their pacemaker to malfunction because of the magnetic field. If you have a newly implanted anything in your body, it can dislodge it. If you have a fresh tattoo, it's going to hurt like a devil. They won't do it. You know why? Because of the pull on the magnetic field. The type of paint. Yeah.
Is that only with newer tattoos?
Yeah, it's all new tattoos. They have to be in there for so long. I forget how long it is before you can have anything done. Yeah. So it's pretty wild. Yeah. I mean, if you've had a stent put in your heart, can't do it. It can dislocate that stent. If you have any kind of a metal replacement in your body, it can pull that metal out. Yeah. There are some limitations to it. Mm-hmm. But in those specific instances, when you have those situations, what you would do, you have to calculate the cost of becoming compliant as well as part of this new asset cost. Because it's something that has to be brought into compliance. It's got to be factored in there as well for your costs. Any questions about it thus far? Is it as clear as mud?
I just kind of got.
You're kind of looking at me like, yeah.
I just got confused whenever he was talking about the MRI machine, and he said something about parking, and I was like, what? Like I just got a little lost right there. But now I understand what he's talking about as far as like the patient access.
Yeah, it's a big room. Got plenty of space that's just empty that we can use, and where the location is in a much better place with easier access for the patients, and we have better parking, which is always a plus. And those are two big things: patient access and parking. It's huge. However, the building was not compliant. So you have to.
So what could you do as a solution? I know you have to, look at the budget and all that stuff, but like, if you wanted to fix that.
You would have to figure out what the cost is going to be in order to house the unit in that particular area, and add that into your new capital cost.
Right, but like, exactly what would you put in so that you could complain if you decided to move the MRI?
It depended on what
the lead wall.
Well, the lead wall definitely has to go in there, but anything else that would be required as part of the state and federal regulations. And I don't know what all of those are. I don't, because that's not my expertise. But you would have to calculate whatever the cost would be for everything that needed to be done to be compliant with federal and state regulations, over and beyond what the piece of the equipment will cost.
Right.
And you would also have to look at, okay, am I going to buy some type of a support package? And a support package is going to be like your maintenance, any kind of repairs, parts that needed to be replaced on it, or any kind of technical errors that could go wrong. Technical support, period, and any kind of maintenance for, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. And that's got to be added into your cost. So it could easily cost you $2 million to put in an MRI machine, a new MRI machine in an area that needed to become state and federal compliant.
But,
Easily.
like, as far as transfer, that would be a cost for that too, right? So it'd be a certain way that you have to move it.
Well, most of the time, if you're going to go into a new area, most of the time you're going to wait and do that whenever you are buying a new piece of equipment, because it is extremely costly to move an older piece of equipment. It's really not cost effective.
I was thinking about that. It's like you can physically just go to another.
It wouldn't matter if I needed to move it from this end of the building to that end of the building. You're going to have a transfer team come in, and it's going to cost, well, it's astronomical. Astronomical.
That's why I guess, all the benefits to moving it are greater because of patient access and parking and all that.
Yeah. If you were going to move it, it would be. You would have to look and make sure that the benefits in moving it is going to outweigh, and you're going to be able to reap your cost. Otherwise, sit tight until you are at the end of that equipment's life. And then, if you've got any salvage value in it, get rid of it. Or you may decide you're going to use it the other couple of years of salvage life for yourself, because that's when you're really going to maximize on your dollars, because everything you make, you're not going to have the outlay of making payments and so forth on a piece of equipment. Everything's profit.
Right.
Okay. But you still have to be really careful with that, because let's say hypothetically that this piece of equipment had an estimated life of 8 years with a 2-year salvage life. And we're at 8 years. And we've decided to keep it. We're not going to try to get rid of it and replace it or move it yet. But we are having trouble with the equipment, and it is down sometimes and we can't use it. And you're going to have to buy a piece of equipment. Are you going to be proactive and start pricing and researching equipment then? Or are you going to wait till it's been down 2 or 3 days and they say, there's no saving this piece of equipment? Yeah, you want to be proactive and start looking. Actually, before it even reaches its salvage life, you should be looking at some of that stuff even a year out before you get to that, so that you are educating yourself on the products and the different bells and whistles that they have, your price, what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, what is being demanded in your community. You're going to want to start gathering all of that information, because if you have a piece of equipment and you're into the salvage life of it and you're having trouble with it, you've really got to look at, okay, if it's down half the time, I'm losing money. I'm better off to implement and put things in place and get me a piece of equipment in here. If you're putting that equipment in a new area, maybe keep your older piece. Use it until it dies, as long as you're still able to make money off of it. But as soon as it's dead, you don't want to lose what you could have gained from it, but yet at the same time, you can't be bleeding from it either. You got to stop it. And you got to have things in place that, let's say your machine A is your newer one, machine B is your older one, and machine A is booked up for the day. We've got patients in every time slot we can do something. And we've got patients in time slot, all the time slots for B, and B goes down halfway through the day. So one, you could lose money, but two, ultimately, what do you do? I know what I would do if I was the manager. I would be trying to work those patients in as best I could. Now, I would probably have to pay some overtime to get them done, or rescheduling some of them early the next morning before some of the other patients came in to try to get them taken care of. That would allow me to maximize some of the dollar, so I wouldn't lose that patient and the revenue, because if that happened too many times, then you lose your credibility with your patients. But yet at the same time, you want to still make money. But ultimately, if it came down to me breaking even and keeping my patient, I would still probably do that. I would accommodate my patient, because that'll be return business down the road. And then they're going to tell their friend that, they took really good care of me. Even though the machine went down, they still got me in today. So you have to look at those type of things as well. Any other questions? Well, it is 2:42. We only have 8 minutes anyway. So we're going to conclude this lecture. And we will pick up on Wednesday. We'll finish this chapter up on Wednesday, easy, I do believe. This is only a couple more pages. 1, 2, 3, 4 pages about. And we will start over, and I will probably put up a little video for you. I think I have a video on calculating the internal rate of return in there. It's kind of funny. There is no question for today, so make sure you put that on your homework. And I will be posting assignments. I'll have them posted by tomorrow.